Hi, sixth graders. Today we're going to look at lesson 5, comparing and ordering fractions, decimals, and percents. So the first thing that we're going to look at is a new vocabulary term, least common denominator, or LCD. You'll notice that this is kind of similar to something that we talked about a couple weeks ago called least common multiple. They're essentially the same thing. But let's take a look and break down kind of what this term means. So the least common denominator, the first part of that is the word least. So the least basically just means the smallest. All right, so if I gave you the numbers 4, 7, and 10, 4 would be the least, the smallest. Common means like the most often. So if I gave you a list of numbers 1, 3, 7, 3, 4, the most common is 3. Denominator, as we know, is the bottom number in a fraction. So that means that if I gave you the number 1/2, the denominator is 2, that number on the bottom. And multiple is basically the multiple of a number is the product of that number and any other number. So rather than writing that all down, I'll give you kind of an example. So if I wanted to look at the multiples of 5, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and so on. Each of these numbers is a multiple of 5, right? 5 times 1 gives us 5, 5 times 2 is 10, 5 times 3 is 15, 5 times 4 is 20, and 5 times 5 is 25. So we are going to go ahead and go to the next page. So we're looking at page 130 now, compare and order fractions. So to compare fractions, we have to follow these 3 steps. So step 1 is find the least common denominator. Step 2 is to write an equivalent fraction. And step 3 is to compare. So if we look at our first example, number 1, we have 5/8 compared to 7/12. The least common multiple of the denominators, or the least common denominator, is 24. All right, 8 times 3 gives us 24, and 12 times 2 gives us 24. So we'll rewrite each of these fractions, 5/8 and 7/12, as a fraction with a denominator of 24. So that gives us 15/24 and 14/24. We can look at those and compare the numerators, and we see that 15 is greater than 14. So that means that 15/24 is greater than 14/24, which also means that 5/8 is greater than 7/12. And then, see if you look off to the side here on this little green sticky note on your page, it gives you kind of a breakdown of how to find the least common multiple in case you forget. There's that method, and then there's also our kind of T-chart method, which I will use in some of the next examples. So next we have A, 2/3. I'm going to work these out on another piece of paper. So A, we have 2/3 compared to 4/9. So 9 is a multiple of 3. So we're just going to use 9 for our least common denominator. So to turn 2/3 into 9ths, we have to multiply by 3, which gives us 6/9. If we compare those, 6/9 is greater than 4/9, which means that 2/3 is greater than 4/9. And then B, we have 5/12 compared to 7/8. So this is one that I'm going to use that T-chart method to figure out my least common denominator. So I'm going to make my T-chart. On one side I'll have 12, the other side I'll have 8. And I'm going to write out some of the multiples of these numbers. So for 12, I have 12, 24, 36, and I can keep going if I need to. For 8, I have 8, 16, 24. Hey, 24 is on both sides. So that means that 24 is the least common denominator or least common multiple of 12 and 8. So to get from 12 to 24, we have to multiply by 2. So that gives us 10 over 24. To get to 24 from 8, we multiply by 3, which gives us 21 over 24. If we compare these, we'll see that 21 is greater than 10, which means that 10 24ths is less than 21 24ths, which also means that 5/12 is less than 7/8. And then C, I'm going to do over here, try to conserve some paper space. We have 1/6 compared to 5/18. So again, I'm going to use that T-chart method just to make sure. So I'll have 6 and 18. So I'll have 6, 12, 18. Wait a second. 18 and 18. Now I know 18 is my least common denominator. So that means that 5/18 can stay the same. We don't have to do anything to this one. But 1/6 we have to multiply by 1, 2, 3, which gives us 3/18. If we compare our numerators, 3 and 5, we see that 3 is less than 5, which means 1/6 is less than 5/18. The next part that we're looking at is ordering fractions. So we're going to order, our example is asking us to order the fractions 1/2, 9/14, 3/4, and 5/7 from least to greatest. It's telling us that the least common denominator of these fractions is 28. So for 1/2, we multiply by 14. For 14, we multiply by 2. For 4ths, we multiply by 7. And for 7ths, we multiply by 4. So we'll write each of the fractions as an equivalent fraction over the least common denominator, which is in this case 28, to tell us what order the numbers are going to go in. So in order from least to greatest is 1/2, 9/14, 5/7, and 3/4. So D is asking us to find or to order from least to greatest the numbers 1/2, 5/6, 2/3, and 3/5. So I'm going to kind of put a line here in the middle in between them so that I can keep them all separated. So I know just from looking at these that the least common denominator is going to be 30. Now, if I wanted to, I could, or if I wasn't sure, I could use that T-chart, but I know kind of just by looking at these that my number has to be, or my least common denominator has to be even because it has to be a multiple of 2, and it has to end in a 5 or a 0 because it's a multiple of 5. So the least common multiple I know has to be 30. So to get from 2 to 30, we're going to multiply by something. To get from 6 to 30, we'll multiply by something else. 3 to 30, we'll multiply by something else. And 5 to 30 by something else. So to get from 2 to 30, we have to multiply by 15. So 1 times 15 is going to give us 15. To get from 6 to 30, we have to multiply by 5. So 5 times 5 gives us 25. To get from 3 to 30, we multiply by 10. So 2 times 10 gives us 20. And to get from 5 to 30, we multiply by 6. So 3 times 6 gives us 18. So then if I compare the denominators, I'm just going to write in the bottom corners of each of these spaces the order that the numbers go in. So our smallest number is 15 over 30. Our next number is going to be 18 over 30. And then 20 over 30. And then our biggest is going to be 25 over 30. So in order from least to greatest, our numbers would be 1/2, 3/5, 2/3, and then 5/6. So next, we're going to look at comparing fractions, decimals, and percents. So the book will tell you that it may be easier to compare fractions, decimals, and percents when they're all written as decimals. And that might be the case for some numbers and for some people. But for other people, or for different numbers, depending on the situation, it depends on what's easiest for you. So I already know that the easiest for me is to use fractions. So if that's what's easy for you, do that. But if it's easier to make them into percents, do that, or decimals, do that. Whatever works for each different situation and for each different person. So, example number 3, we're going to fill in the blank with greater than, less than, or equal to make the statement true. So 3/4 compared to 7/10. So it's going to have us write 3/4 as a decimal. 3/4 is just one of those decimals that is kind of easy to remember, because 3/4 is equal to 75%. 1/2 or 2/4 is equal to 50%. And 1/4 is equal to 25%. So those are pretty common fractions. So I like to have those in my head while I'm thinking about these kinds of things, so I can figure out where in a number line they would end up. So 3/4 we know is 75% or 0.75. So we start with comparing the tenths, and those are the same. So we move to the hundredths, and 5 is greater than 0. So that means that 3/4 is greater than 7/10. Our next example, number 4, says Lucita made 85% of her free throws. Henry made 7/8 of his free throws. Who has the better average? So we're comparing 85% to 7/8. So we'll write each number as a decimal and annex a 0 if we need to. So that brings us to 0.850 compared to 0.875. So we start comparing with the tenths place, the eighths, and those are the same. So we compare the hundredths place, and those are different. So 5 is less than 7. So since 85% is less than 7/8, that means Henry has the better average. So let's look at a couple of these examples. I'm not going to do all of them because there are quite a few, but I'll look at a couple of them. So let's start with E. So for E, it's saying 2/3 compared to 0.6. So also keep in mind that you have this cool little chart up here at the top that has some of the numbers in it. So keep that in mind when you're working too. So 2/3 in decimal form is going to be 0.6 repeated. I'm adding that extra 6 for a reason, and I'll show you why in just a second. And 0.6, if we annex a 0, 0.60. So the reason I added that second 6 to the end, now that bar, remember, tells us that it's repeating forever and ever and ever, is because if I didn't write it, it would look like 0.6 repeat, is the same as 0.6, but it's not. So if we compare the first two numbers, our tenths, they're the same. And then if we compare our hundredths, they're different. 6 is greater than 0, which means that 2/3 is greater than 6/10. Okay, now I'm going to look at G. So G is 1/5 compared to 0.2. So this time I'm going to convert these numbers into fractions. So I'll keep 1/5 how it is right now, and 2/10 changes to 2/10. Now to make these into fractions that have the same denominator, I have to multiply 1/5 times 2, which gives me 2/10 compared to 2/10. 2/10 compared to 2/10, they're equal. So 1/5 is equal to 2/10. Notice how sometimes it might be easier to use fractions, sometimes it might be easier to use decimals. It's up to you. Just like with H, 42% compared to 0.44, we can look at 0.44 and think back to one of our lessons last week about decimals and percents, and know that 0.44 is the same as 44%. So we can compare that pretty easily too. So it just depends on who you are and what works best for you and what works best in each situation. So like I said, I'm not going to do a ton of these because there's a lot of them. But if you have questions about them, let me know and I am more than happy to help. So our final example says the table shows the school carnival attendance. Which grade has the greatest part of the class attending the carnival? So we have grades 6, 7, and 8. So we have 5/8, 0.5, and 58.3. So it's already converted each of these numbers into decimals. So 0.625, 0.500, and 0.583. The book is graphing the numbers on a number line, so if that's helpful for you, you can do that. So in order from least to greatest, the numbers are 0.5, 58.3%, and then 5.8. Since it's asking for the greatest part of the class attending the carnival, 5/8 represents grade 6. So grade 6 had the greatest part of the class attending the carnival. So our next example is K. So it says Hiroshi found that 3/5 of his class prefers vanilla ice cream, 26% prefers chocolate ice cream, and 0.14% prefers strawberry. Which kind of ice cream do students prefer the least? So if I'm looking at K, I'm going to put all of these kind of into fractions again. So I know that 3/5, if I convert it into hundredths, is going to give me, to multiply to make 100, so that means I'm going to multiply by 20, and I'm going to get 60 over 100. And then 26% is equal to 26 over 100. And 0.14 is equal to 14 over 100. So 3/5 was vanilla, 26% was chocolate, 0.14 was strawberry. If I compare these three numbers and I compare the numbers on the top, the numerators, I see that strawberry is preferred the least. Because only 14/100ths of Hiroshi's class prefers strawberry, whereas 26/100ths of his class, or 26% of his class, prefers chocolate, and 60%, or 3/5 of his class, prefers vanilla. So you guys have some practice pages that you can work on in your book, and there's some practice pages on Canvas for you to work on. If you get stuck or you have any questions, please let me know and I'm happy to help. Have a great day, 6th graders.